Well, it only took me months, but my curtains are finally up. I finally have a nice backdrop back here, and hopefully the lighting will be a little bit better in my videos going forward, since I'll be able to block some of that light from the window while still having my window open for the cats to look out. So fingers crossed that kind of helps, but I just love how these look in here. I'm really excited about this. I need to put a few things back into place because I moved them yesterday while I was putting the curtain rod up. But yeah, I could not be happier with all of this. Very pleased with how this has all turned out. But that's not really related to today's video. I'm just excited about it. Today we're going to be talking about all the books that I read in May, which was not a strong reading month as I had been hoping. I slumped really hard throughout May. I think I talked about this in several videos recently, but the adjustment of going from grad school and having like a GA position to having nothing going on and just kind of job hunting has been really difficult. It's weird going from having a very busy schedule to just having no schedule at all. So I've been kind of grappling with that and just ended up kind of slumping throughout May. So it wasn't as strong a reading month as I would have liked, but I did pretty much enjoy the things that I read, and I did manage to read a few things for the different readathons that I participated in. So the first thing that I read was for Horror Mayhem, and this was the only book I ended up reading for that one, but I read The Hollow Places by T. Kingfisher for the local horror week, and I did really enjoy this. I ended up giving it 3 stars. It's not my favorite T. Kingfisher. I think this is very much a book of two halves. I think the first half is much weaker than the second half, and I'm finding that it's somewhat forgettable. Like, I don't remember a lot of the first half of the book now. That being said, I did really like the characters of this book. I liked Kara and Simon and the kind of friendship that develops between them throughout the book, and the way that they kind of like learn more about each other and the way that they're supporting each other through it is like a really horrific experience. I thought that that was really strong, and I like the humor in this because I always like T. Kingfisher's humor. And I think the latter half of this was a lot more fun once we kind of get into the resolution portion of the story. I think the first half just struggles with not having enough, or not struggles, but suffers from not having enough build up. Like, it is just very much drops you into the deep end right off the bat before I think you have a chance to really know Kara or Simon. There's just no tension build up, and I really missed having that because I think that that would have made the actual horror in the first half much scarier for me if there had been more tension building up to it. The second half I thought was much stronger, and for me fixed some of the issues I had with the first one, because the second half has a lot more tension build up and has a lot more like creeping dread in it, and I thought that that was well done. So for the most part, I didn't love this, but I still enjoyed it. It's just not my favorite T. Kingfisher, and again, I'm finding it a little bit unmemorable because there's a lot of details now I can't quite remember. I remember the general plot, and there's some specific scenes that I thought were really strong that I have, like, got stuck in my mind. I still remember some of those, but, like, in kind of general, the plot is not super memorable to me, and I don't know that it's one I would ever, like, return to. I do think it's interesting that this tends to be the one that people like over the Twisted Ones, because I think the Twisted Ones is actually much stronger. But I think that just kind of depends on like what kind of horror you prefer. And this one was just not a kind of horror that I personally like. There's a lot of like multiple dimension stuff going on here, which I don't find all that interesting or compelling. So just didn't quite work for me. After that, I read volume 6 of The Way of the House Husband, and I really enjoyed this. I gave this 5 stars, as I give all the volumes of this series. This is just my like pick me up, feel good series that I read when I'm in a slump, when I just don't know what else to read, and this never fails to make me smile and laugh. It's fun. I had a good time with this one. This whole series just like little vignettes of things, so there aren't like specific things that I remember that I could be like, oh, this particular story was really good. I just enjoy the characters in this. I enjoy the like silly situations that Tatsu ends up involved in by way of just being like the scariest house husband around, and I just think it's like fun and silly, and it's a good like palate cleanser between other things. So I gave this one 5 stars, as I usually do with this series. After that, I finally got around to reading The Last Blood Carver, which has been on my TBR for a couple of months, and I really enjoyed this. I had a lot of fun with this one. The magic system in here is really intriguing. It's a medical magic system, so it's very much based in like anatomy. And I thought that it was really interesting that this book is kind of dealing with both magic and science, because there's also a lot of medical science here. And there's a lot of discussion about like the intersections between our main character Nika's magic and the medical science that is more pervasive in the city that she's living in, and the way that like that tension between those two things has influenced like the outcome of things for the people of the island where Nika's family is originally from. Like, that has been a big element of the situation that they've been pushed into, which is that at the beginning of this, we kind of already know that sometime prior to the book, this other city-state or nation-state that is not where she's currently living. This other group has like gone onto the island where her family is originally from, and they have colonized it and mostly killed or captured most of the people living there in search of people like Nika who are blood carvers because they're experimenting on them. And so Nika's family are like refugees in the city of Thumos where this is set, and that's the backdrop that we learned within like the first chapter or so. So we find that out very early. And that's that tension between magic, and this the magic that is specifically like distrusted because blood carvers are seen as like people who can unnaturally warp the body. At least in Thumos they are. That tension and the like medical science that is being advanced in Thumos, it really drives a lot of the plot here. I really liked Nika as a protagonist. I think that she's really clever and practical, and I thought that it was really interesting that she wants to be like a ruthless person, but she just can't because she was raised to be compassionate and kind, and she wants so badly to help people. I just think that's a really interesting kind of personality for her, and I liked the way that the mystery played out. I think that the villain in here is fairly obvious, but I really like that the villain is ruthless, and that I feel like Vanessa Lee really goes for it. Like, she commits to making this character villainous, and I really appreciated the way that that was written. So those are kind of my main thoughts. I think my major complaint here is just that the timeline doesn't quite work, so it makes some of the relationships feel underdeveloped. There's a lot of moments in here where you kind of get this, like, oh, well, several weeks had passed, and I was like, when? What have we been doing since then? And it was just a little bit disorienting, and I think that made some of those relationships not feel as strong, because it felt like, for the reader, at least for me as a reader, that relationships were advancing just, like, super fast, and in a way that didn't totally make sense, but actually there was, like, lots of time passing. We were not being made aware of it, so I don't think that totally worked for me, and I think that the timeline needed to be a little stronger and a little clearer for me to understand how these different relationships were developing. But overall, again, I had a really good time with this. I think I do have some more in-depth thoughts in the blog that I read this for. I did this for a reading my Q1 pre-orders vlog, which will have been posted just before this, I think, so I'll link that somewhere so you can check it out if you want more in-depth thoughts on this as I was reading it. But overall, highly recommend it. I think it's really fun, and I'm really looking forward to reading the sequel because this has a massive cliffhanger ending, and I really want to know what happens. The penultimate book I read in May was The Kingsman by Nora Sakovic. This was originally the end of the All for the Game trilogy, but now there's a fourth book that came out in like April. Nora Sakovic has decided to punish me for my hubris and thinking that I was going to be done with the series. I am not. I will be reading the last book, which is called The Sunshine Court, at some point. The Kingsman, though, I gave 2 stars. I think it's stronger than book 2. I don't think it's good. And it has a very flat ending. So this one has this very strong focus on Exie in like the first half of the book. And then there's this wild kind of nonsense twist that comes out of nowhere and then gets resolved really quickly, right around the halfway point. So I don't think the pacing was good here. I think that it was a little bit all over the place, and there is a romance that suddenly crops up in this one that I don't think is set up well in the earlier books. Like, there's some hints of it in the earlier books, but it just feels like it is very sudden in this one. Also not very healthy in any way, but it's being framed as like healthy, at least for Neil. So I was like, I don't really like entirely the way it's being portrayed. That being said, there are some really great character moments in this one, including with some of the romance moments. I think there's some really interesting things about like consent and autonomy in here, especially around the romance. And there's also some really great moments of just Neil forming relationships with his teammates in like really genuine relationships where he's kind of like kept them at arm's length before. And this one he really starts to kind of close that gap. And I did really enjoy a lot of that. I think my problem was just that the pacing wasn't great. There's really no obstacles for the foxes throughout the book. They don't really hit that much adversity as you would expect them to, based on the fact that this is like leading up to this massive championship game against a team that has never been defeated. There's just not that many obstacles for them throughout the book, so it just kind of felt like none of what they were doing really mattered all that much. Then we get that really nonsense twist in the middle that made me put down the book for like a week before I could come back and finish it because I was so annoyed. And then that resolves really quickly. And the ending is kind of sudden. You build up to this thing, and then the thing happens at like 93%, and then suddenly the book is over. And it just felt very strange because it's this massive thing that's been building up to, and it just suddenly ends. And I don't think the pacing for this is good at all. I think the book is just wild and weird. And if you want to read something that's just wild and weird, the series is good for that. It's just a weird experience to read because it's doing so many different genres, but like not conforming to any of the conventions from any of those genres. So I think it's like an interesting experience to read it, and I'm not like unhappy that I did read it as much as I go, I hate the series, I don't want to, I have to read the 4th book, dang it. I am doing that of my own volition because I am intrigued by just the weirdness of it all and the way that none of it has been researched at all, none of it makes any sense. It's a weird experience, and one that I think, like, if you really like just weird experiences, try it. I feel like it can't disappoint because it's just bizarrely written. But yeah, it's not like a good, I don't recommend it on the basis of it like being like a good series or anything. The final book I read though was much better. It's a 4-star book. I read The Brides of High Hill by Nebo, which is the, I think, 5th book in the Singing Hills cycle. I really enjoyed this. This is a more gothic version of this series, or like a more gothic version of an entry in the series. And I just really enjoy this series every time I pick up one of the new books because she is really interesting. As a traveling cleric that is going around collecting histories and collecting stories, I just like their perspective on the world and the way that they approach problems. They're very like diplomatic and kind, and I just really enjoy watching Chi go on all these different adventures. I also really liked the way this book did some like disorientation in a very like purposeful way, and the way that that played out across the story. I found that really interesting, and I just liked that this one goes dark, and it commits to doing that. This one does have a very dark twist partway through that I thought was really fascinating, especially because like the earlier books aren't necessarily like light or without like kind of dark elements and grief, but I think that this one really goes for the horror elements that it brought in, and it you know, doesn't pull its punches on those pieces. There were some really strong horror bits here that really, I think, shocked me, or not really shocked me, but they were really solidly creepy and enjoyable. And shock is not quite the right word for what I want. Like, I really enjoyed the horror elements. I found them very atmospheric for sure, and believable within like the world of the Singing Hills cycle. So yeah, I just really appreciated how much this book went for those horror elements and how dark and spooky it went. I really liked that. I thought that the conclusion was really interesting because it goes in a direction I very much did not expect, and I'm looking forward to finding out what she is going to do next, because now they have this like really wild adventure to go tell people about, because this was just really like fascinating. I just liked how dark this one was in comparison with like some of the other ones where it goes much more horror rather than just like thinking about like grief or kind of darker themes. It goes straight for scary, creepy, unsettling, disorienting in a way that I thought was really effective. So those are all the books that I read in May, mostly ebooks. Got my 2 little physical books right here. And hopefully June will be a stronger reading month. So far I haven't picked up anything in June, but like we'll see. I'm hoping that June will be stronger just because I'm not putting as much pressure on myself to read as much. I'm not doing any readathons in June, and I think maybe trying to do 3 in May was overambitious, but I am pretty happy with the stuff that I read. I would love to know down in the comments below though, what's the best book that you read in May, or the one that shocked you or surprised you the most? I'd love to know what you guys were reading, what you were enjoying. And I think that that's pretty much all I have for you today. So I really hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you have, I hope you'll consider giving it a like, maybe even subscribing to see what comes next. I'm currently posting on Tuesdays and Saturdays, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye.